Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to you, wherever you are today. Thanks for joining us here today. It's just gone 11:30 here in Melbourne, so we'll give people a minute or two just to get on their computers. But as you're here early, thank you very much. If you wouldn't mind taking a moment, just in the chat box in Zoom, so down below here, take a moment to write down where you're coming from, so which country you're in, what school you're working in, and also let me know where you're at the moment in terms of your work with habits of mind. Is this something that you're just starting out with now? Is it something you've been doing a while and you're wanting to take the next steps? Or is it something else altogether? So in the chat box down below, you see me look this way, I'm sort of looking at the chat box. And we also have the wonderful Jane on the call. Jane is my assistant and producing today. So, hi, Jane.
Hey,
Jane will be helping me out too because the old eyes don't see the chat box all that well, and she might read a few of those out for me. So pop your school and your experience with habits of mind into the chat box, and we'll go from there. I can see Kate is from One School Global. Hi, Kate. How are you? I know a little bit about One School Global. My good friend Terry Westblade's there as well. So is Terry there with you?
No, school holidays here at the moment, James. But no, Terry's the one who introduced me to it, so I thought I'd find out more about it.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, that's great. Who else have we got here as I lean forward? Woodland Secondary in Singapore. I know Woodland Secondary in Singapore. You're just starting out with habits of mind. Karatha Primary School. Kate, how are you, Kate? Where I can't see your face, just because there's not enough people on the screen. So we've got a lot of people here that have been doing some work with me in the past, and obviously doing some interesting things with habits of mind, with growth mindsets, learning agility, all the rest of it. Fantastic. So it is 11:32. It is holidays, as Kate mentioned, for some of you, and you've given up some of your holiday time. For others, it's late in the evening, so I promise this won't go for more than about 45 minutes. I have obviously a plan in front of me around the things I want to cover and the things I'd like to share with you. But if you've got questions along the way, if you've got particularly something that you have to have answered by the time we finish, put it in the chat box. If I miss it, Jane won't, and she'll shout out to me and make sure I address it at some point. Because what I'd like to do today is share with you what I've learnt over the last 20 odd years or so, the outline of it, the key elements of it, that really make an impact with habits of mind when you take that whole school approach. We're not talking about classrooms specifically. We're looking at that, how do we infuse habits of mind in our whole school? We're going to talk about some of the resources I've got available, and that includes, we're going to listen to a few interviews, parts of interviews with some practitioners, some leaders in the schools, talking about how they work with habits of mind. And that's, of course, part of this Succeeding with Habits of Mind resource that I've got available for schools at the moment too. So we're going to go through this idea, and at the end of it, I'm going to invite schools, all of you and everybody else, to partner with me as we work together to bring the habits of mind to your school, classrooms, and your school community as a whole. So I thought that one of the best places to start with this would be to hear from Art Costa himself. Of course, Art Costa and Bennett Kalick are the authors of this work. They're the people who brought it to life and brought it to the community at large. And I've been very fortunate to have a relationship with Art Costa and Bennett Kalick over the last 20 or so years. And I was talking to Art maybe a month ago, 6 weeks ago, sort of updating things. We were talking about the Habits of Mind profile tool and how the habits of mind are being adopted in corporate settings and in other settings as well. And I asked Art, what happens in a school when they adopt the habits of mind? And this is what he had to say. Oops, my apologies for that. It's all technology. It'll all work in the end. Give me one moment. here we go again. So we'll go back to here and we'll go to here.
Well, I think there's one thing that I would mention, and that is, and as you know, James, because you've been part of this, what we see happening in schools that have adopted the habits of mind, I think is truly phenomenal. And for example, when an entire staff and a community, including the parents, adopt a common language, so they're all talking about the same thing, and there's a sharing of events and sharing of indicators that they all share. What it does is to build a community in the school that goes beyond anything else that I've ever seen. I know that when we have in the US schools that need to be accredited, I think you do too in Australia. And when Waikiki was accredited, the accreditor said they've never seen anything like it, that the whole staff and the community were focused on the same outcomes. They spoke the same language. You could see the habits of mind repeated at every grade level in every classroom. And that unity, that consistency, that bonding of a staff is one of the most amazing and phenomenal experiences I've ever had in a school.
Wow. So there's Art talking about Waikiki Elementary School. Now there's a school that have been embracing the habits of mind for over 20 years now. I had the privilege of visiting them 10 or 15 years ago now. Quite an extraordinary place, and a school that is recognised in the American system as a blue ribbon school. And when you talk to them about their success, because they were a school that were about to close, they were a school that were on the verge of being shut down for poor performance, adopted the habits of mind, built this shared understanding, these shared outcomes. And I want to come back to that word outcomes, this shared language, and built a community based around the habits of mind that became recognised as one of the top achieving schools in the United States. That's quite an extraordinary thing. The trouble is, it's not easy to do. If it was easy to do, we'd all be doing it, wouldn't we? I mean, obviously. So let me tell you a little bit about my history and about how we came to understand why it's so difficult to succeed with habits of mind and what we need to do to actually achieve. The schools that succeed in the long run with habits of mind, you can see evidence of that in 4 areas, and that's what we just heard Art talk about. You can see it and hear it in the environment, right? It's part of what you walk into this school, and it's just all about the habits of mind and about helping students get better at the habits of mind. It's part of the curriculum and the assessment. So you see it being used and developed in the curriculum and the teaching practice of the school, and assessed, so students know that both in terms of reaching academic performance, they need to engage in the habits of mind, but also the habits of mind are assessed. It's supported by policy and practice in the school. That it's not just one teacher in one classroom doing their thing. It actually gets to the point where the school is embracing it to the level that it's built into the traditions of the school. And as you heard Art talk about, it also becomes part of that wider community. When I started this work, I had no idea what Waikiki was doing. When I started this work, I was the middle years curriculum leader at a P12 school in Melbourne's outer west. And I figured, look, there's 16 habits of mind. I'd come in, I'd do 8 in the first week of term, 8 in the second week of term. We'd be good to go for the rest of the year. That didn't work out so well. But what I'd done, and I was committed, I thought this was a good idea. What I'd done was teach the habits of mind. And it's the most natural thing in the world for a teacher to do, to say, here are 16 habits of mind. My students need to know and understand these habits of mind. Here they are, know them and understand them. The trouble with that is that it doesn't actually make a big difference to student learning outcomes. Once I taught it, we started using the language, and that felt great. Don't get me wrong, when you introduce the language of the habits of mind to students, it feels really, really good. These kids start talking about managing their impulsivity and how important it is to strive for accuracy. To hear an 8-year-old student start talking about metacognition. I walked into a classroom in South Australia at one point, and there was a special needs student. And I started talking to them about habits of mind, and they were saying, oh yeah, and this student started talking about metacognition and how important that was. It's really powerful. But the impact it has on student learning outcomes is pretty small. For all the energy, for all the excitement, just sharing that language of the habit of mind just ends up a labelling exercise if you don't take the next steps. And this was the problem. In my school, we weren't getting any traction. I was a little bit ahead of some of the other schools around me though, and I started working with them. I was fortunate to be appointed to a project leadership role in the Department of Education here in Victoria, where I led an action research circle across Victoria with a couple of hundred schools. That work grew to be part of a national research circle with the Australian National Schools Network, and indeed became international when we connected with New Zealand schools. Now, these schools were resourced. They were committing teams of teachers to 5 days of professional learning throughout the year. They were passionate about the habits of mind. They saw how important they were. They came to these workshops with the support of their leadership, with all the right things in place. Like, from my perspective, as the project leader in all of this, I couldn't have asked for better people. These were people who knew what they wanted, had the support of leadership, and thought they were doing everything right. Most of them went out and did pretty much what I had done, which was teach the habits of mind, build a shared language. Then a few of them, like my classroom looked like this. You know, the posters went up, I taught the lessons about it, did all that sort of work. We started telling the kids which habits of mind were important for them to use. I would walk into classrooms, and these other schools would walk into classrooms and say, you know, students, now is a time when you need to manage your impulsivity, or now is a time, and it felt good. But about 90% of those schools, a year or two down the track, the habits of mind had become last year's initiative. It all got a bit tired. I had one school in Adelaide in South Australia, here in Australia, a Catholic girls' school, really nice, compliant school, no discipline problems or anything like that in that school. And the principal was passionate about the habits of mind. And she would walk in after the second year to assembly and say, girls, today in assembly we're going to talk about this habit of mind. And 800 compliant Catholic girls would go, oh, across the auditorium. They'd heard it last year. They heard it the year before. They were sick of it. I had another school in Perth where the Year 7 teachers had just gone nuts with habits of mind. The whole year had been about habits of mind. And the kids were on fire, and the teachers were on fire, and the principal loved what was going on in the Year 7 classroom. And the whole school agreed what was going on was fantastic. And then they went to Year 8, and they said, we have to keep doing this. And the Year 8 teachers said, well, we'll teach them the habits of mind. And they said, we know what the habits of mind are. And then the Year 8 teachers said, well, you need to use these habits of mind. They said, we're doing that already. And 6 months down the track, the Year 8 teachers went, they did this in Year 7, let's just get on with what we've always been doing, back to normal. These are passionate, committed teachers, teachers just like you who want to get this right, but got to a point where the whole thing fell over. But not in all schools. In some schools, we saw some really profound changes. Had a school in Adelaide, Westbourne Park Primary School, under the leadership of David Johnston, and David Adams. And at their school, 3 years working with habits of mind, doubled the number of students in their upper growth band for literacy from 20% of their students to 40% of their students. In the same period, increased the number of kids in the upper growth band in numeracy from 30% to 45%. Now, you talk to the leadership at that school and they'll say that it is all about the work they did with habits of mind. Another school in Queensland, Nudgee College, 5 years under the leadership of David Johnston up there, very slow, deliberate implementation. At the end of that first 5 years, had the first lot of students who came through from year 7 to year 12, had their best lot of year 12 results in decades. Other schools like St Margaret's in New Zealand talk about similar results where students over a period of time saw these dramatic improvements in learning outcomes. And that's what I want to talk to you about, because what was the difference? That's what I became really interested in. What was the difference between the schools that were passionate, committed, driven, all the rest of it, but after a year or two went, that's enough, and the ones that really saw some improvement? And in a word, where did I put it? There it is. In a word, that was the difference. The schools that succeeded with habits of mind did it because they approached their work with habits of mind with a growth mindset. They went past this critical tipping point that I described, where they shifted from asking the students to use the habits of mind, to know what they were, to talk about them, to instead asking them to develop, to improve, to extend, to build. See, the problem with the schools that fell over was that they taught the habits of mind like a topic to be understood. The schools that succeeded were teaching them more like a subject to be developed. Of course, we're doing managing impulsivity again this year, but it's different to last year. The way you managed your impulsivity last year isn't sufficient anymore. Now you need to develop, to improve, to grow, to extend. And once you go past that tipping point, you shift your language from use to improve, some spectacular things start happening. The first one is that the responsibility shifts. Think about these bottom three levels here about being taught, communicated, or required. It's all about what the students do. You need to manage your impulsivity. You need to strive for accuracy. You need to, as soon as you go above this line, it's now my responsibility as the teacher to teach you how to be better at these habits of mind. It now becomes a pedagogical tool. And I want to share with you another video from Karen Watson. Karen is the, I think she's deputy principal now. At the time she was head of English at Curwen State High School in Queensland. And Karen talks about how the way she uses the habits of mind in a curriculum, in a classroom, in a planning, forces her to shift her perception. So have a listen to Karen, and I'll check the questions while you're watching the video, and then we'll come back and sort of keep going from there.
I've used one particular habit with my year 8s. I used managing impulsivity for a poetry unit that I did, and at the start of the unit the kids were all about how this was just, you know, not calling out, but I wanted them to manage their impulsivity in terms of their responses, not to say the first thing that came into their head, to really think thoughtfully and reflectively before they answered in a test situation. And that happened. The habit of mind forced me to choose specific strategies. I just really enjoyed working with that. It changed my perception of how things were developed and delivered, and the students, their results improved, but they really improved in the practice of that habit of mind. They have a deeper understanding of that, and I know that they will transfer that to other situations.
So what Karen's talking about in that video is that when she chose this poetry unit, excuse me, she chose the habit of mind of managing impulsivity because she felt that if the students were better at managing their impulsivity, they would improve their results in the poetry. And when she knew that she had to develop that habit of mind, it forced her to think about her curriculum delivery. It forced her to think about the way she taught and what she was teaching for. She wasn't just teaching the students to use the habit of managing impulsivity. She had to devise strategies to help them get better at managing their impulsivity. And the way teachers that approach the habits of mind in this way behave is they'll start a unit of work by saying something like this. Boys and girls, over the next 6 weeks, we're going to be learning about poetry. And we're going to learn all this stuff about poetry and outline the content learning outcomes. And we're also going to be learning about how to get better at this habit of mind of managing impulsivity. Because when you get better at that managing impulsivity, you're going to get better at your poetry. So there's that dual outcome of having both the habit of mind and the content as your focus. Of course, when you look at schools like Waikiki, you look at schools like Curwen State High School, other schools, Nudgee College and Westbourne Park, it's not just a curriculum exercise. As I suggested before, the habits of mind are nourished by the policies and practices of the school. It becomes the way you do things around here. David Adams at Westbourne Park, when he moved on, he retired a few years ago now, and he tells a story about how the habits of mind were so embedded in the school and so valued by the school community that the school council, when developing the criteria for the selection of the next principal, built those habits of mind into the selection criteria. They refused to appoint a new principal who would not continue this work. That's the sort of thing that happens at Waikiki as well. And of course, at the very top, the habits of mind actually get lived in the community. It becomes part of what you do around here. It's just the way things are done. And everything from your curriculum to your assessment to your communication and your awards. And it makes sense that it should, because when you think about the way Art Costa and Bennet Kalick derived these habits of mind, they derived them from looking at highly successful people, people that were the best in their field and getting better. And so if that's what we want from our students, to help them improve and to grow and to raise the bar, then it makes sense that we can adopt the habits of mind as a vehicle for doing that. Now I've got a quick question for you. As you look at this ladder here, where does your approach currently sit? How are you approaching the habits of mind? Or if you're just starting this journey, where was your planning heading? Like me, in the early days, we're going, well, we'll teach the habits of mind, we'll do half an hour a week and we'll show the kids what they are. We'll put the language into our certificates and awards and things like that. Did you say, look, we'll have a tick box down the side of the unit plan to tell the students which habits of mind are important? Because those approaches tend not to work very well. You get some benefit and they're necessary steps, but if you don't continue up this ladder, you don't see the sort of improvements in learning outcomes that we've seen in some of these schools. You've got to make that shift from use to improve. You've got to make that shift from classrooms to a school that supports that development. And ultimately, these schools get to a point where it becomes part of the wider community, the parents love it. Now, the resource that I'm talking about today, the Succeeding with Habits of Mind resource that the videos we've watched are in and a whole lot of others, will get you here somewhere. We'll get you teachers developing the habits of mind in your students, developing curriculum that improves the habits of mind, and building structures in the schools that allows you to support it. We can get you up here, but it takes a little bit more to get there. Let's have a listen to Meredith Wenter, also at Curwen State High School, about how this work impacts the school as a whole.
I think what's wonderful about habits of mind is that it's not just something that you teach students, but it's actually something that you take on yourself, and it can really make a difference in your own life. And I don't think that unless you actually have taken on the habits yourself and that you're very practiced at them, then I don't think that you will be successful in teaching these to students. And I think Art said something, or James said something yesterday that really resonated with me when he said that when he went to the Waikiki school, which is a school that was founded using the habits of mind, that what the teachers said was, they talked about three things. The first thing they talked about was how they used the habits themselves in their own lives and how that had made a difference for them, how they use them in the way they work in the school and their decision making, in the way they meet in the sort of award ceremonies they have and those sorts of things. And then they talked about how the students use them. And I thought, well, that is really important, because that means then that as teachers, they're growing as learners as well as growing as teachers. And I think that's a very valuable thing for teachers to have in their lives. So,
yeah, quite an extraordinary piece. And I'll also just share something with you from St Margaret's in New Zealand. Angela White talking about her experience with Habits of Mind at St Margaret's.
What have the Habits of Mind's done for St Margaret's? Basically, they've done a lot, mostly bridged the gap between the students and the teachers, so that they're both learners. So the teachers aren't the fountain of all knowledge anymore, but the teachers are learners as well. They're learning about habits of mind, and they can be a beginner in some of the habits and more advanced in others as well. So it's provided a vehicle for teachers and students to both be seen as learners. It's also given us a shared language. So when some teachers say that they did teach persisting, but they didn't call it that, and they say they did teach risk-taking, but they didn't call it that, we've decided to keep the shared language so that it actually becomes part of the culture of the school. So we're a school that's rich in traditions, and we have a lot of things that carry all the way through across all the year groups, and Habits of Mind is one of those now. And yeah, so it's a vehicle for learning across year groups seamlessly. That's our aim, to have the seamless integration from the primary school all the way through to the secondary school.
Oops. Beg your pardon. Technology glitching again on me. Here we go. So what those two videos were talking about is where the Habits of Mind can take you. This idea of not just a shared language, although Angela talked about it in terms of a shared language, it's also a case of this ongoing process of developing the habits of mind throughout the school, of how it becomes the shared focus. We heard that before from Waikiki, around what it means to succeed at the school. Now, we've got a little gift for you today. This book, little ebook, Habits of Mind, What You Need to Know to Get Started. Jane's going to drop a link in the chat box now for you to download, because it gives you an opportunity to just learn the lessons from some of these people. I'm in the very fortunate position to have been working with these schools for 20 years or more now. We have interviewed them, we've asked them what matters, what counts, how it works. And one of the questions many of you might have is, how do you go about implementing this whole school? Well, if there was one single answer for that, I would give it to you. But what we do know is that every successful implementation strategy has been founded on a growth mindset. If we don't approach it with a growth mindset, we never get past that use to improve tipping point that is so critical. It is whole school. Although teachers can do an awful lot in their classroom on their own, when it becomes whole school, it makes such a profound difference, because you can carry it forward year after year after year. And there's that focus on development, improving growth. But exactly how that's implemented is very much contextual to each individual school. It depends on the size of the school. It depends on their history of adopting new initiatives. It depends on the leadership and their preferred leadership style and a whole lot of things. So while I can't say, here's the recipe for succeeding with Habits of Mind, I can say, here are all the ingredients. And here are interviews. We've talked to 20, 30 different people now about how they've gone about it in their school. At Westbourne Park, David Adams was very hands back, just let the staff lead it. Once the staff made a decision, he stepped in and said, right, we're doing it, and away we go. David Johnston, on the other hand, very different approach. He said, we're doing it, but come along when you're ready. We'll have James work with us for the next 4 years. And who wants to come on board this year? Who wants to come on board next year? And after 4 years, he said, anyone not on board, bye, politely. He didn't say it like that. David would be upset with me if he heard me say it quite like that. But very different approaches. And we've got the interviews with all these school leaders that we can share with you as you try and work out what approach is going to work best in your context. Some of the information is in here as well. And what this package does is it does two things. It gives you as school leaders all the resources you're going to need to upskill your staff. So there is a whole online course that many of you will have seen in my recent blogs that you get access to for your whole staff, not just for you, for everybody in the school. It goes through how to make connections with the habits of mind, how it matches with growth mindsets and practice, talking about learning agility, where it fits in the curriculum. It helps teachers become familiar with them. We've got interviews with Art Costa, and I add to those to just explore what each of them mean, because sometimes they're not as obvious as it might seem. We have, of course, the Habits of Mind profile tool. I am so excited about this tool. This is something that I wish we had had 20 years ago. What the Habits of Mind profile tool does, and we're just refining the sort of next iteration of it now, is allows you to take a snapshot of you or your students' habits of mind, to work out where their strengths and weaknesses are, and to target that development year in, year out. And this tool is something, as part of this package, you all get access to for the use in the school, and is an absolute game changer. I'm so excited about this tool, and I'll be talking more about it another time. The course leads your staff through understanding what it looks like to get better at the habits of mind, a really critical point, because the thing that led most schools to fail initially was not understanding what that improvement looked like. We had improvement defined for us in our subject areas, but in habits of mind, what does it look like to get better year in, year out? And now we can describe that. We go through how we design habits of mind as learning outcomes. So teachers can actually say what Karen Watson did earlier on. This is the way you currently manage your impulsivity. This is the way you're going to do it in 6 weeks. And this is what I'm going to do to help you get better at those habits of mind. And then we talk about how we infuse that whole process into the curriculum design process. And then we also talk about how to introduce the habits. Now, you might look at this list and go, well, why didn't you introduce the habits at the top? If you are starting out this work, can I please implore you not to start by introducing the habits of mind? That's what we did all those years ago. That's what most schools do. It's the easiest thing in the world to rush in and teach the habits of mind. What I call the flag waving activities, build the language, and it's exciting. But if you don't know how to take that next step from using to improving, from it being the student's responsibility to it being the teacher's responsibility, that initial rush of energy falls off a cliff. You need to know where your second step is before you take your first. And that's part of the reason why I'm here. This package that we're talking about today, the Succeeding with Habits of Mind package, isn't just for your teachers, it's for you as leaders as well. As school leaders, what we work into this package is access to all those interviews. So we have, I haven't added it up, hours and hours of interviews with school leaders, with Art Costa and Benna Kalick, talking about how to implement this work successfully, answering all those common questions. And importantly, you get me. The schools that buy into this package, I am going to mentor you throughout the process. As you design your implementation strategy, I'm going to consult with you. I'm going to tell you that this works, this doesn't work. Here are the strategies to use here. As you're trying to get the teachers all on the same page, get them all on board, these are the sorts of things that you're going to need to do. Here's the response that you need to give them when these questions arise. So I'm there on tap to support you with my 20 years of experience and all these resources as you implement habits of mind school-wide. Now, clearly, if I'm mentoring schools on this work, it's a drain on my resources. I simply don't have the space to have lots and lots of schools doing this as much as I would love to. So I'm actually limiting the number of schools that buy into this package to about 10 or 15. Depending on how we might be able to group them a bit, we can squeeze up to 15 in. But I'm doing this with Habits of Mind and also with mindset and other things. So we've only got a limited number of spaces in this program. And if you'd like me to support you in this work, reserve one of your places, shoot me an email. Jane's going to put my email address into the chat box if you don't have it already. But just shoot me an email and say, hey, James, we'd love to have another conversation about how this works in our setting and what it might look like. Or say, look, reserve me the spot. That's great. But my goal here is over the next 12 months in particular and beyond, because you don't run out, this doesn't expire, but particularly the next 12 months, I support 10 or 15 schools in building this work to a point where it becomes part of the school culture and that teachers are using it to develop habits of mind in the students. Because it's that tipping point that really makes a difference to student learning outcomes. So I'm going to pause there for a minute because I can see Jane's put my email address in. I can see she's put the first booklet in. Jane, I think there was also a second booklet there if you want to drop that one in. The second booklet that I'm going to share with you is about those 3 key elements that all the schools have, about how mindset plays a role, how whole school approach is so critical, and how shifting to that idea of development, growth, improvement is so important. So as we do that, I'm just sort of going to scan through the chats. If you've got any questions, take yourself off mute, yell out, or pop them in the chat box, because I'd love to spend our last 5 or so minutes responding to your individual questions and making sure you leave here today with everything you need to know to make that decision about whether you want to move forward with this work, with Habits of Mind, with me or on your own. And you know, you've got what you need to do it. So I'll pause as people compose your questions. I saw some, we've got people from Melbourne, Our Lady of Southern Cross. I saw revisiting Habits of Mind. Yeah, Sandy, I'd be really curious. The revisit, does the first visit sound a lot like what I described in my classroom? A lot of teaching the habits, a lot of the language, and then sort of a loss of momentum? Is that the sort of history that went through the school? I can't actually, as I lean over, I'm actually looking at your faces on the screen. So it's one of those weird Zoom things, like I'm looking at you, but I'm not. But now I'm looking at you and I'm not. You know what I mean?
James, hi, it's Kate from Karatha.
Hey,
How
Kate.
does this fit in with the growth mindset, the leading learning one that you've got online at the moment, and, you know, like complementary, how would it all fit together?
Yeah, look, there's 3 elements to this. When we talk about, I'll come back a step, I'll put my clicker down. With the Habits of Mind, the schools that succeeded, as I said, approached it with a growth mindset. Without the growth mindset, it became a labelling exercise. So the work you're doing with starting with a growth mindset, it lays the foundation for this question to be asked. Most people, not just teachers, most people actually approach the world with a reasonably low growth mindset, fixed mindset. And they think these behaviours, these habits of mind, are attributes that some people have and some people don't have. And in the schools that start with the habits of mind without first shifting teachers' mindsets, what happens is that the teachers start going, well, you know, James just can't manage his impulsivity. That's why he's such a problem in the classroom. But Kate, she's really good at striving for accuracy and really good at persisting. That's why she gets the good grades. And it becomes a labelling exercise. But when we start with this idea of actually what we're doing here is trying to teach students to behave more intelligently. Right? The habits of mind were originally called intelligent behaviours. And so when we start with this idea that our job as teachers is to teach kids to be smarter, the next question is then to ask, well, how do you do that? how do you teach kids to be smarter? And the way you teach them to be smarter is you develop their habits of mind. You teach them to engage in those habits of mind more skillfully. So starting with the foundational growth mindset, the next logical thing to move on to is the habits of mind. And we can have a chat about that. The other part too, folks, the program Kate's talking about is my program around growth mindsets. And because they all sort of intertwine and there's a little bit of overlap between them, once you've sort of started on one, the others fold in and we give that to you at a discounted rate as well. So little head nod to you for that one. Other questions I can see here? Yeah, Sandy's saying that, yes it is, we're a new school that has grown over time, lots of new staff. And that's one of the benefits of the resources I'm giving you. I'm never going to take them away. All right, they'll belong with the school, not with the staff. But that induction program. And see, that's one of the things, you know, I saw a lot of schools, particularly small primary schools that can change fairly quickly because there's, you know, not so much resistance to change in terms of inertia. Big staff are harder to change. But I saw a lot of small primary schools in particular that they all went, yay, this is great. And all the teachers adopted the habits of mind for themselves and said, this is fantastic, I'm doing it in my classroom. But what happened was we had 30 teachers doing their thing in their classroom with habits of mind. And from the back, if you looked, the school was doing habits of mind. But the school wasn't really doing habits of mind, 30 teachers were. And because they didn't move to that level of policy and practice to embed it in their school policies, embedding it in their engagement programs, in their, you know, all their new student packages, all that sort of stuff. As staff drifted out, a new idea came in with the new staff and they started doing that, and it didn't belong to the school. It belonged to the individual teachers, and that exactly what Sandy was saying happened a lot. That if you don't go to that level of infusing it into the curriculum, into the culture and the practices of the school, it dilutes over time. Other questions or thoughts? I'm just looking over. Yeah. Thanks, Kate. All right, well, listen, folks, I promised not to keep you for more than 45 minutes, and I know some of us are on holidays. I'm going to draw a line here. I'm going to give you an invitation if you would like to be part of this package. And I tell you, when I was starting this work, if someone had offered me this, it would have made my journey that took 20 years much quicker and much better. We have learnt so much over this time, and I'm really keen to share it with you. Shoot me an email, let me know. The package is 3,000 Australian dollars. Now, if you're in the US, it's almost nothing. But yeah, it's well worth what you get out of it. My coaching included for a year, and let's face it, I don't give up on schools. I still talk to the schools that I worked with all those years ago. So shoot me an email, let me know. I'll hang around for a little bit if there are people that are sort of sitting back wanting to ask a question. But thank you for joining me today. I'll send you an email, thank you, and a link and all the rest of it. And hopefully I'll get to see you soon. Thanks, folks.